right, welcome to chapter 9. These vocabulary words, I'd really like you to pay attention to which ones we're using for this particular chapter. I do cover a few. If you do check out the PowerPoint, you'll see a few things highlighted. Make sure that you are double checking exactly the words that I'm using as we move forward. The vocabulary here is most specific to helping us understand how to be even better critical thinkers. We've kind of like brought up to the table, a few things that will sideswipe us in how we're thinking as critical thinkers. But now we really want to focus on what does it mean individually, because this is exactly how we become critical thinkers, is recognizing our part in that. Okay, so first and foremost, some opening questions I'd really like you to consider. One, what is fair-mindedness? You could look in the book, that'll help you. But what is fair-mindedness to you? How do you feel fair-mindedness is? And then why are critical thinking and fair-mindedness related? How are they related? And then why is being an open and fair-minded more important now than ever? Being open-minded, that's something to really be mindful, especially in the time and place that we're at. All right. Also, what is the difference between being an individual perspective, which we'll cover a little bit later, versus a group perspective, which we're going to cover first? Okay, so one of the things to understand is what are some examples of things that we're seeing from an individual perspective, okay? Our own health, our own success, desires for things, and so forth inside. Okay, who makes these decisions about those things? Is that you who's making it? Is it society who's putting that on you? Is it your family? Is it your culture? Is it your religion? What's the thing? Okay, so that's something to be mindful of. And what are some of the groups that we identify with that will actually persuade how we feel as individuals, maybe from smaller to larger? When it comes to making decisions or viewing the world, dealing with the things around us, all right? Do we tend to see things from our own perspective first or from a group perspective? That's something to really consider as you move forward. You think about babies being born. They're going from nothing but their own perspective. There's nothing else that's influenced them because it does not set in yet. They're literally just their own very selfish little baby selves, right? As they should be, right? They're in survival mode. Okay, and then when do we start developing an outside perspective? That might just depend on, how you were raised, what you're raised around, or who you're raised around with, or what your experience is. Each person is going to be different. Think of the issues that you've dealt with from a group, all right, from a group perspective. Maybe deciding where to live, how to pay for maybe like a road trip, if you vote, bond measures, or, whether certain things should be legal or illegal in a state, that sort of stuff. Who tends to make these decisions, right? When we're talking about a group perspective, who's making these decisions, okay? Is it voters? Is it your delegate? Like, what's the thing that's making these decisions on your behalf in a way, okay? Are you decisive? Are you, I don't know, like where's your perspective? Do you go along with others, or are you the one who's making the true decisions, right? What's your confidence level on that? Sorry, there's a bug in here. Does the size of the group determine how decisive or flexible or amiable you are, right? So if it's you and your buddy making a decision versus you and a group within class, like how are you coming to decisions within either one of those groups? Because it matters. Your perspective might change. There are some issues and problems in our society that absolutely must be dealt with from a group perspective. Again, that's county laws and regulations and decisions, that state, that's, it could be community, small like town. Sometimes things have to be dealt with from a group perspective. Also things that, we really have to think about is not just within the house, which is a group, or within the, community, or within the county, or within the state. We might have to think even bigger globally. Things like climate change, recognizing climate change, what it is that we need to do as a whole to kind of quell, if we can, what's going on. We think about maybe overfishing or over hunting or over, trying to get food on the table, right? Like, what does that look like as a group? How are we deciding what's going to be best for all? Okay. We think about immigration across the world, approaches to, maybe contagious diseases. That could be anything between, coronavirus and beyond, all the things that we are susceptible to as humans, and so on and so forth. So go ahead and think about where we as a group are going to have to make decisions, okay? The question is, do we have individual opinions about these? Absolutely. First vocabulary word is ethnocentrism. Ethnocentrism. And this is a belief that one's own culture is superior or more important than others. Many of you have either been a part of it or seen it towards you, right? We've seen that very often. Many people view the United States as superior. And why might that be? Why do we come up with these things, whether it's, our own culture and, our own country? Why do we come up with these things? Well, there's many different reasonings behind this. One could be, propaganda in the media. We talked about the media before, and, that suggestion that they put out there, or sensationalism, or something that gets us to believe or feel or think a certain way. So propaganda will do that. We absolutely do teach this in schools. The United States is the best. We're wonderful. Don't look behind the curtain. That's the favorite thing about the United States history, is we like to pretend we don't really have a history. So yeah, that also creates a superiority. Oh, we're the best, we're the greatest, right? We whitewash pretty much, what our country was, based on. We also look at how pride and patriotism is really built into, just society in general, some places more than others. And then, maybe there, when you look at it, there are some really good things about the United States, that you could say, yes, go USA. And there's also some things where you're like, sorry, USA, right? So just think about that, how ethnocentrism, how you might feel superior, from your country or your culture or something. Like, where does that come from? All right. And then, do other countries feel the same way about their country? Absolutely, right? And then what are the dangers of this belief that, let's say, that the United States itself is superior? Like, what are some dangers with that? Well, for one, it would be unfair treatment of those that are from other countries. We obviously see that. That happens all the time, every day. It's been going on for however long, since the beginning of people coming over to America. That's just, that's our history. Maybe the hoarding of the world's resources. Think about how we use cobalt in just about all our phones, and how we also have 60%, I believe, of the resources of what we use. We have a military domination. Think of, if you're in the military or had ever been, all our different posts throughout the world. I used to be a military wife, so I used to see all of that. Let's see. Outsourcing of pollution. We do this very often, especially in China. If you haven't seen how bad China's pollution is, there it is. So that's some maybe reasons why we might be, why it's dangerous to have these beliefs. There's also there's also discrimination about against immigrants, and so on and so forth. So how is it dangerous to have ethnocentrism? It's very dangerous, right? Because it blinds us to many things, and it also creates dangerous habits, right? That could be harming other people. Ethnocentrism is the tendency to view this is also viewing one's own race or culture as essential, and diminishes the importance or values of other races and cultures, okay? And America's been built on that, right? Since the very beginning of time. If you were a Native American, you either assimilated or you died. That was like kind of your only option, unfortunately. And so that was kind of how our country has been pretty much built, on ethnocentrism, that, white people are superior. That's the idea. Please do not pull that out of context with the soundbite that I've said that. But that is how ethnocentrism works, right? And it could be other countries and other cultures do that very often too. It's not just all white people, just so that we're clear on that. Ethnocentrism is just a culture feeling that they are the end-all be-all of wherever they're at. Some instances of ethnocentrism you may have seen, in addition to the belief that the U.S. is the best country, would be that the belief of one's own religion is superior. We have a huge thing going on right now in the United States, which is really rather scary, because what happens is when you kind of put these blinders on, not only do you shut out other people, but it does create violence and, many other issues that come along with that. Again, there could be persecution of those who believe differently. Again, as you come back to the, how the United States was built, it was definitely built on ethnocentrism, where people who were not Christian were either, again, assimilated or killed to some extent, or children were placed in certain schools to help them pretend they don't know what their past is, right? We kind of like whitewash away someone's beliefs. So discrimination against those of other races is a huge one going on right now. Subjugation of women, and then many other things like slavery, not just in America but in other countries, and then recognizing slavery is the person who is the legal property of another and is forced to obey them. So just keep that in mind. Belief that one state is better than another state. I come from California. I've lived in other states. For some reason, California is just in my heart. I don't know if it's because it's progressive and pushes for rights for all. Not all of California feels that way. Northern California and Southern California are very different in those mindsets. The question is it possible that my reality assumption is correct? Well, my reality assumption might be correct, but that's not to say there's not danger involved with that thinking. Okay, recognizing that while, it might be true does not necessarily mean it is right. Okay, and this can apply to all things, not just my, love for California or whatever. All right, so what's the problem with ethnocentrism? Fair decisions can't be made if you think you're superior. Seems like the obvious statement. You can't be fair if you think you're superior, because that means you're closing your ears off to all the things that are out there. All right. The biggest thing, the best way to be a critical thinker is to have fair-mindedness. We really want to focus on fair-mindedness. Not always is it easy, because we have feelings, we have values, we have, something in our system that, it's sometimes hard to break open and have fair-mindedness. Fair-mindedness is a trait that is used by critical thinkers that involves respect for others, willingness to hear and understand different viewpoints on an issue, and an openness to change whenever new information warrants it. Remember, we're going to throw in that word warrant, right? What is fair-mindedness? When you think about fair-mindedness and someone who has respect for others, who's willing to listen to other people and is open to change their information based on new incredible information that they get. Who do you know who's like that? Do you feel you're that way? Do you feel like you could be that way? What's your feelings towards someone who is open and fair-minded, right? When you're talking to someone and they're reciprocal of, both sides, you're just kind of like, oh, okay. Makes it a little easier to have a conversation, right? Because you don't feel like they're rejecting you. They're open to going, okay, let me hear where you're coming from. And there can be that back and forth. All right. Do you admire those people? How do they act? What's their characteristics like? Okay. All right. In opposition, there are people who are egocentric. Ethnocentric is bigger. Egocentric is very egocentric. Okay. Egocentrism. All right. We're going to kind of I'm going to try to give examples on how it's similar but different from other things. So egocentrism is the individual version of ethnocentrism. There's a belief that everything revolves around that individual person. Their desires, their values, their beliefs, and actions must always be considered correct and superior in order to preserve their ego. Okay? There's egocentric, but then there's egocentrism, which is a real extreme version of egotistic behavior. Very extreme. So egocentric behavior, people who put themselves at the center of almost anything, and we obviously know egocentric people. It's just a, characteristic of some. They might maybe dominate a classroom or your family events or, things like that. So it's egocentric versus egocentrism, which is a very extreme version of being egocentric. Does egocentric step over the line into egotistic, does egotistic step over the line into egocentric? Yeah, so maybe initially it starts as, kids who aren't sharing their toys, and then it becomes such an extreme that at some point they never do, like, don't touch my stuff kind of thing, like literally do not touch my stuff. It could be in the line of maybe, girls who, I say girls, guys, whoever, who steal other people's partners, right? Who they don't think of the consequences. They go, mine, that's mine. And don't have a regard for consequences, I guess, or other people's feelings. They just think me. Okay, people who argue their opinion regardless of facts and examples and won't listen. Yeah, it's important to be mindful of when you're egocentric, if you're egocentric, that your opinion and mindset is not the end all be all, right? And as a critical thinker, sometimes, it's hard to like let go of our values and the things that we hold true to ourselves. But once we start getting more information, it's important to go, okay, I see that now. All right, and we'll get a little bit more into that, but sometimes it's scary, right? We talk about the house from that oatmeal video, and we go, you just took a wall down that was holding up a big piece of my house, and it doesn't look the same as it was originally. That's very hard for many people, even myself included. Okay. All right. Think of anyone who you might think might actually be egocentric, not just egotistic, egocentric. Okay. We could think of different people who we might go, is this person egocentric? An example might be Donald Trump, right? Is he egocentric, egotistic? Are all presidents egocentric? Do they have to be? Is that what we need for our country? Is, we want someone with a powerful ego? Is that our thing? I don't know. That's the question to ask. And then you might ask, what is egocentrism? What are some examples? And maybe something like, a person who, takes it personally when they get a speeding ticket and they blame the cop for getting pulled over. And it's like, but you were speeding, right? So, is that egocentrism, right? We might ask that question. We could also ask, are people who won't wait in line or refuse to take a failing grade, are they egocentric, or are they just either entitled or arrogant, right? So we kind of have to think about things like that. Just stuff that I want you to be mindful of. What does that look like? And as we are looking closely at egocentrism, we have to recognize that it blocks critical thinking. It is not good for us to either be egotistic or egocentric, because it's forcing us inward versus outward. And then what happens with that is you're not ever going to see the truth, in a sense, right? Because you're constantly only assuming what you know is to be true without taking in new information. Okay. In order to be a critical thinker, you need to be logical, fair, and less egocentric, less egotistic. All right. And we need to start developing certain skills, right, that help us be good, critical thinkers. One is to recognize defense mechanisms that we use. I'll cover those in a second. And acknowledge where our areas of thinking where maybe we're not so rational. Sometimes we're irrational, or sometimes we make rationalizations for our behaviors. Remember page 51 and 52. Oftentimes students seem to miss that in the reading. Why is it super important? We are a lot more persuasive when we show respect and courtesy to others that we disagree with. You're more likely to be willing to listen to someone who's willing to listen to you. Like, if you're going to talk with me and you're open-minded to things I say, I have an urge to want to listen to what you have to say, because I'm thinking, it's kind of a, I don't know, reactionary thing. At least for me, not all people. We talked about kooks in the beginning. Sometimes people will refuse to ever change how they are and where they're coming from. Maybe it's egocentrism, maybe it's fear, which sometimes egocentrism is a development. It does come from fear, right? Okay. Defense mechanisms. All right. We defend and protect our egos with defense mechanisms. And these are techniques that help us avoid unpleasant realities, right? Defense mechanisms. Trying to save face, as it were. Okay. A rationalization is a defense mechanism. Again, page 51 and 52. Defense mechanisms where we come up with seemingly good reasons for what we do. We justify ourselves and we make excuses and explain why. Explain away our actions, behaviors that should be examined more closely, right? Rationalizations are like, oh, don't look at me. It was that. It was this person, right? Rationalizing our behaviors. Something I'd like you to do. I'm not going to grade you on this, but it would help you understand your rationalizations a little more. Go back to chapter 2 on 51 and 52, please. And then look at page 403 and combine and see how the rationalizations fit into the examples of 403. All right, there you go. Just a little something to give you some practice so that you can recognize what they are. Okay. Another defense mechanism is cognitive dissonance. A lot of you have probably heard that very often. I think it's a big thing on TikTok right now. It's always a big thing it's always something big on TikTok, right? Okay, this is where we wall off competing beliefs or thoughts, leaving us in a state of tension or anxiety as a result. Okay, this occurs when our behaviors are inconsistent with our beliefs. Okay, so an example of cognitive dissonance for me would be, oh, little piggies are so cute. They're so adorable. I love them. But I also love bacon. Cognitive dissonance, right? I don't think that, pigs should be raised in factory farms and they should be roaming free and having good, beautiful, happy, little piggy lives. But I also really like bacon. If we no longer are, killing pigs to make bacon, right? So cognitive dissonance, really important to be mindful. Again, this is my, personal example. You're going to have your own, where something where, you have a belief in a thing, but also there's that, right? This could be cognitive dissonance to wanting a, very clean, healthy environment outside, but still driving a gas guzzling car and using a bunch of plastics, right? Unfortunately, we live in a society where that's just kind of where we're at right now, and it's a little exhausting. We'll talk about that in a second. Okay, extreme version of cognitive dissonance is PTSD. An example would be maybe a soldier coming back from war, and that when they were in war, they saw civilians being brutally killed out in the streets. Well, this person might have trouble not reacting when he's walking down a street and hears maybe like a car backfire, right? Because it's that traumatic reaction of what happened versus what's real, right? Cognitive dissonance. You might know someone who has that, especially the campfires. Whenever there's either a fire in another place and the town starts to smell like smoke, you might see certain people acting a certain way. It's their reaction to that. Again, cognitive dissonance. It's not that the fire is here, but it feels like it's here to them because of what they've gone through. All right. PTSD can also come from all types of different traumas. Doesn't have to be war. It could be abuse or traumatic events that have happened. Kind of like a child who's supposed to pretend that everything's okay. The cognitive dissonance, everything's okay, even though they go home and they're abused, right? And I know these are like kind of some triggering topics, but this is what we need to be mindful of as we think about cognitive dissonance. You might have some other examples. How does can cognitive dissonance affect our critical thinking? If you've been raised, especially very heavily, very close to your heart, to your family, to your religion, to your culture, if you've been raised to believe one thing and then exposed to information that contradicts it, what do you do? Right? And I think of this all the time. Like, I grew up in a very Christian family, and I remember hearing one time in a history class, my instructor was like, "Oh yeah, well, the reason why you have rabbits during Easter is because rabbits signified fertility and spring and all these things. Well, it was pagan. Well, in the Roman Empire, they wanted to bring in Christianity. The emperor's wife was very excited about it, and he's like, "Oh, please, let us do this." Well, how do you do that in a pagan society? Well, you kind of overlap the two. So Christianity crossed over with the pagan holidays, same thing with the winter solstice. So for me, I was like, oh, wait a second. So Jesus was born in the summertime? Even though we celebrate in winter, it's because of that crossover of trying to bring Christianity into a pagan, world, if that makes any sense. That's why, if it doesn't make any sense to you, why we have Easter bunnies and Christmas trees and all these things, those are just pagan things that we still continue to celebrate, despite putting that layer of Christianity on it. Anyway, so that's, for me, was a cognitive dissonance in, when I grew up. Okay, again, we can think of like abolitionists, whatever, you get the word, abolitionists? The words. Anyway, let's keep going. During the 1800s, where black slaves were in every way people, right? They believed, obviously, that, black men and women were people. They were slaves. Let's do something about that. But then you had white slave owners who, how do you deal with that claim of someone saying, these are people, you are enslaving people? And so it was kind of again, cognitive dissonance, mind-blowing little thing for them. It's not little. And then they had to ask themselves, how can they justify still owning slaves if slaves are people? Okay. Anyway, so, they sought or created information that confirmed their own beliefs and ignored and explained away information that was contrary to their beliefs. They're rationalizing their behaviors, okay? Again, prime example of cognitive dissonance. Again, if you talk about how much you enjoy and love the environment and you want to save it, and yet you continue to use plastic utensils and drive a gas guzzling car and eat a lot of meat, I'm not going to say that's not me. There's a lot of times where I'm like, man, I just do not do enough. I recognize it. I'm sure big companies could probably do a little bit more, but anyway, it's a little side note on my part. Okay, anyway, what's a result of cognitive dissonance? We've got anxiety, stress, physical tension, depression, poor sleep, rages, use of alcohol and drugs to blot it out, blah, blah, blah. What do you know? Sounds like society. Okay, we live in a very cognitive dissonant society, and we try and mask all these things. We have emotional and physical responses to it, and that is kind of where we live in society. It's really hard. It's hard to live like Mother Teresa, okay? It's hard to be congruent. Okay, so congruence is where your beliefs conform with your actions, okay? How are your beliefs and your actions aligning? So for me, I believe in the environment. How do we stop global warming? What can I do? Don't use plastic, right? Because I also know that you can't really recycle plastic. It creates microplastics. It's a big thing. What should my behaviors be? What would be congruence for me? Not using plastic toothbrushes, not, using plastic containers and that sort of stuff. Unfortunately, I do not. I get it. Hence depression and anxiety and all those wonderful feelings and guilt that comes with not living in congruence with your values. Okay. If you're thinking environmentally, people who are living in congruence with, their love for the environment would be people who are vegan. Obviously, meat, we know, is terrible for the environment. They live, in a way in which they're using less plastics. They're using things that are sustainable, right? So that would be someone who's living in congruence with their belief in the environment. Okay. And again, it doesn't have to be about the environment. It can be about politics, law, war, treatment of, minorities or women, or, whatever you call it. Anything where what is happening socially may be at odds with how we go about our lives. Okay. All right. How do you know do you know of anyone who's congruent with their life? I have somebody who lives a congruent life, and God bless her. I love her. She's a great influence on me. I'm working on trying to get there. It's hard. It's hard. Sometimes living in congruence, especially when it comes to that sort of thing like environment, is a little harder because we're in a fast-paced society. It doesn't allot for that too much. One thing I try and do is I don't idle my car. I don't get little bottles of water. I try and use environmentally safe feminine products. It just kind of goes on. I try and do as best I can. Even if it's a little still is more than nothing. Okay? Think about examples that you might have. Okay, so rather than developing congruence, where, I recognize this and I try and act on these values, sometimes I deal with cognitive dissonance through denial. All right? Defense mechanism, denial. Denial is a state of mind that blocks critical thinking by refusing to accept the facts or evidence and rejecting information that threatens the choices that have been made. All right, do you know of anyone who is in denial about, election results or, coronavirus, whatever? It's just, there's anything, you could just throw this out there. There's a lot of things to denial, or, the environment, or, I don't know, there's so many things. I don't want to make a whole list. I'm using old topics that I'm sure have been beat to death, so give you kind of a rough idea. Go ahead and take a look at that oatmeal video to help remind you. I don't need to throw it in here. We're getting long enough as it is. You can take a look on it at your own. I don't want to force you to watch something you've already watched. When you think about your house or your fortress, and you think about your walls and your roof and all the things that hold it together, what are those things? What are your values? And are you okay if we have to take one of those walls away? Maybe either put something else or just take it away all completely. What does that look like for you? And if it seems very abstract and a weird statement, go back and look at that oatmeal video. It'll be in the lecture notes. Okay. So when you think of things like I think of in my brain fortress, certain things that, are hard to maybe accept might be, say maybe there's a politician that I look up to, and then it turns out they're not the person that I thought, right? That might take a thing from my wall. I don't do that because, one, I just don't believe in idolizing politicians. I think that's a very terrible, scary place to be. But that could be a thing for you too. Maybe for me, I think about how my parents were my age at one point. They were young and they probably did the things that I've done in my life, and that's weird to me. So that kind of like shakes my house a little bit. Think of your own examples of things where, you know, you have a certain wall and then you find out more information and it makes that house really shaking. What do you do? Do you accept it or do you deny it, right? Rationalization and denial didn't destroy your peace of mind, absolutely, right? Because if you're getting the information but you're pretending it doesn't exist, that's going to destroy you. It's almost easier to be open-minded and fair-minded and just be like, okay, tell me the things so I can just deal with it. Okay. Sometimes it's really hard, especially because it undermines our ability to think critically about issues, especially if we refuse to address the realities of some things, right? I've had a student who a couple years ago denied a bunch of research and experience in my classes, and when they stood up to do their lecture, it was cringy, it was embarrassing because they stood up there and they were denying all this evidence and research that was just given, and went off on some, I don't know, bigoted, just wild, presentation. I had to stop them. I'm like, oh. Because it wasn't based on fact. It was just very much in denial and rationalization about their feelings towards something that, unfortunately, based on all the information that we had gathered, was definitely contradicting their statement. So anyway, they were in denial and using rationalizations to validate their, why they were doing what they were doing. You might have examples of other people who've done that too. Okay. Let's see here. Denial and rationalization keep us from learning from mistakes and repeating errors in judgment. Right? When we're rationalizing, we're denying, we keep repeating the same mistakes over and over because we're not accepting the truth of what's really going on. That could be, personal or maybe social things can follow. Maybe you're dating the same type of person who treats you badly, right? Like we're not recognizing, like we're in denial. We're rationalizing why we're with this. Oh no, he's not that bad, or he'll change, that sort of thing. How do I know? I've been in those relationships, right? Maybe we're repeating history about things that we should stop repeating in history. We're seeing it happen now. It becomes one of those things where it starts to create tragedies as we continue to repeat things because we're in denial or we're rationalizing behaviors, right? All based on fear, right? Let's see here. So I'm trying to get out of as many notes as I have. You can look at the lecture notes later. So the good news is that sometimes we do take a good look at ourselves. We do go, all right, we've been repeating this terrible history. How do we fix this? We think about, now women have the right to vote. Women actually have bank accounts now. There was a time we didn't have our own bank account, so we're getting there. We're getting somewhere. They're taking abortion off the table, but let's not go down that road right now, right? We got to look at some of the positive as we come through here. We recognize that slavery is now regarded as a human rights violation. It's not to say that it doesn't still happen, but at least we're recognizing that it's a human rights violation and that we need to stop it in some way. There's so many different examples of ways in which we have looked at ourselves. Can you think of some, and what do those look like? All right. Agree or disagree on this statement. The greater number of people who find any idea correct, the more the idea will seem correct. So unfortunately, sometimes that does go against us. When we think of examples where it's like groupthink, we'll get into that word in just a minute, where the bigger number of people who find something correct, like slavery, the more the idea will seem correct. Everyone's like, oh yeah, okay, that's fine. And then it turned around and people are like, whoa, hold on. No, that's not correct, right? And so then it comes back and forth, kind of like a pendulum, okay? We can think of stuff where examples of that might be, Nazis and the ethnic cleansing. Unfortunately, that looks like that's for some reason a thing coming back. I don't know why we're in denial or rationalization about why it was okay before then and it couldn't come back. I don't know. Anyway, so there's a bystander effect where in New York, there were 29 people who witnessed a woman being murdered and nobody did anything. Wait, what? Right? That's a part of, what do you call it? Rationalization and denial. Sometimes you're standing there and you're just not, how is that happening? We think about all kinds of stuff where, like, ostracism of unpopular kids by everyone in the class. All of a sudden, everyone goes for that. I'm imagining it still happens. I know it did when I was in junior high, that sort of thing. And that happens. That happens even on a bigger stage, like in politics and all this stuff, right? So it just is what it is. Okay, so all those are examples of conformity, right? Groupthink will come a little bit later, but conformity is a tendency to follow those uncritically. When you're thinking about, you're teasing all these other, this kid's like, why are we doing that? Well, because so and so did it. It's like, well, why? I don't understand. Oh, because he's different, or he's this, or he's that, right? But you're not thinking critically about it. You're not even taking sitting in their shoes and going, God, that sounds terrible. I'd hate to have that happen to me, right? It's because you're conforming to what someone else is doing versus having your own critical thinking and your own ability to recognize that it's not good. Okay. Again, same thing with conformity when it comes to the bystander effect or things like that. At its mildest, it's a way to gain acceptance and avoid conflict. So you'll notice sometimes you'll be in a group and everyone's doing a thing and you're just like, it's easier to go along than be that guy, So that sucks, right? That's just kind of how it is. You can think of it as like a school of fish all moving together to avoid, being picked off by a dolphin or a shark. Okay. And that's a part of how we work in society, right? I'm not saying it's right. I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm just saying it's what we do. Okay. If you're accepting others' ideas uncritically, you are no longer using your best judgment. If you're going along out of fear, that's conformity, and that's not you being a critical thinker. We could talk about, assuming there was a time when, maybe they still think it's true. Early Christian belief that the earth was the center of the universe and was circled by the sun, and the persecution of those like Galileo who thought differently. Here's the problem when we have conformity is there could create a lot of tragedy. In fact, there has created a lot of tragedy, and we want to be mindful of that. You can also think of the four humors. There was a time in medieval times where we thought there was the four humors, and then people would do bloodletting, and then, to balance of the humors, and then people were dying because they thought that was the answer, and it turned out it was not right. So just be mindful of that. Is there a dangerous kind of conformity? Absolutely. It happens all the time. One of the biggest ones right now actually would be abortion, because you're conforming to an idea without knowing all the consequences that come with it. In some terrible, beautiful way, we are seeing why abortion is important, because a lot of women are like, man, this is for my own health. It's for my family. It's for myself. It's for, maybe the baby itself. There's just a lot that has come from it. So conformity without having all the information creates tragedy. Okay. Let's see here. Even with conformity, though values gradually changed in the 1970s, it was, like in conformity originally, we always thought the tattoos were for sailors, gang members and prisoners. I am neither of those, but I have tattoos. Same things with, what do you call it? Piercings, right? I now have, I have all kinds of little piercings. I don't know if you can see them all. Okay, but over time we have learned to accept these, and it has now been, something where we've conformed to the point where we're like, oh, it's fine. Tattoos are not that big of a deal, or piercings. People have, hair of different length. Unfortunately, not all hairstyles are accepted, which is obnoxious, but that's a whole different story on a whole different level, and we could talk about that later. Groupthink, it's a noun, and you can't use it as a verb. There's no such thing as group thinking, okay? Groupthink is an aspect of conformity, so it's a part of it. It's a tendency to rigidly adhere to the beliefs of the group without question, okay? Religions do this often. Women need to support their husbands, or, we believe that the earth is a certain amount of years old, right? Literally very rigidly thinking of something without question, right? It's like you have, you believe, you have faith because that's what faith is, versus looking into the actual, reality of it. Cults often do this. Political parties do this all the time. You could think of George W. Bush. There was a time where he wouldn't allow dissenters in the room, especially during invading Iraq in 2001. You can also think back to, or actually just recently with Trump, who would, had a tendency to fire anybody who disagreed with him. Group think, right? We would just do the thing, rigidly adhere to a thing without question, and it's a very scary thing to do that. Back in 2006, there was a time when there was the mortgage bundling, and we had a quote-unquote small recession, mini recession, that we're, I think, still feeling a little the repercussions from, because people didn't want to believe that, there was denial that home prices and mortgage bundling couldn't continue to rise, right? There was denial that, oh, it's going to do fine, it's going to do great, and then it completely imploded on itself because people were in denial of it, okay? Sometimes this happens, groupthink happens in a classroom too, where people might, be dominated by one student. So sometimes we put each other in groups so that way the groups can have a voice at least, okay? Let's see here. I mean, there's all kinds of types of when, how do we avoid groupthink? Again, I would put people in groups to avoid one person being the most dominant voice and everyone just kind of like, whatever, they're going to take over the classroom's conversation anyway. So I put you in groups so everyone has their own chance to think. Sometimes in a workplace, you might bring in experts that will come in and make a point to challenge challenge what you believe or, your norms, that sort of thing. And then sometimes the best leaders are ones who will step back and facilitate rather than everyone follow that person's opinion. So great leaders create great leaders, if that makes sense, giving people a chance. Let's see here. Consider alternatives before deciding on one answer when it comes to that stuff. So to avoid groupthink, you'd think of other ways in which you can maybe do something instead of just going, oh, whatever they say, let's do. You can brainstorm, you can vote. Unfortunately, not always does it work, but we're doing our best. Defense mechanisms. All right. The type of defense mechanisms that we use are emotional reasoning, where our feelings are the proof that we are analyzing situations accurately, right? Well, I feel this way, so that must be the way. That's not always the case. Sometimes we overgeneralize. Overgeneralizing is the same as hasty generalizations. It's a fallacy that often, post hoc fallacy, right? Post hoc ergo propter hoc. So if you can't remember what those are, please go back to chapter 6. Mind reading. You're sure you know what you would think about something. I'm sorry, let me phrase that. You are sure that what you would think about something is what everyone else would think about, right? So you project your own attitudes and feelings onto others without even talking to them, right? Mind reading, kind of like an assumption, right? We also have avoidance, where that's where one's, well, since it's not in the book. Anyway, so avoidance is not one of our vocabulary words, but people use it anyway. So the idea of avoidance is you avoid answering a question and discussing a difficult issue, for example, by making a joke, right? We avoid the thing that we're supposed to be talking about. Filtering is a vocabulary word. Y'all, I'm sorry, I'm trying to get through this. Where people hear only the negative in someone's comments, filtering out all the positive. And sometimes I do this when my own writing or my teaching or something is being critiqued. Oftentimes I see that with students. They filter out all the positive things I have to say about your work and then only focus on the negative, and then assume you're terrible writers, which is not the case, okay? So catastrophizing, anyway. Where someone anticipates a disastrous outcome to every problem. Catastrophizing. Thank you, there's the word. Personalizing. Everything that happens is related to you personally. That's right, that's a defense mechanism, making it personal. So that the forest is burning in Sonoma County is going to ruin your plans to go wine tasting this weekend. Personalizing it, okay? If the teacher makes a comment in class that people should, keep their eyes on their test, you're assuming they're talking about you. That's personalizing. In perfectionism, I see this often with students. I see it in myself. It's you believe that you are not allowed any flaws. It also that your successes aren't worthy of attention. It also all focus is placed on failures or on comparison with others to see how you've measured up. Perfectionism, it'll make you sick, my friends. Okay. An activity you could do: look at those 8 mechanisms above and generate either a true story, preferable, or a fictional situation illustrating those defense mechanisms. It's all about practice, okay? All right, so what do we do about dealing with defense mechanisms? Be mindful of your own weaknesses. Just be mindful of it, okay? I know that I tend to personalize, or I'm a perfectionist, right? How do I do that? When I feel it's coming, I own it, I cool off, I come back and realize, like, hey, look, I recognize I was being a perfectionist in this, and I, need to kind of reflect on it. All right. Work on the issues that you respond to with defense mechanisms, mentally recreate the situation with a different outcome, and then be aware when in a conversation with others that you're using your defense mechanisms. Okay, and how well do you think it would work if you pointed out defense mechanisms of other people? Don't do it. You don't need to point it out. You need to, oh, that's a defense mechanism. That just makes somebody more defensive. Instead, empathize and recognize that there's a deeper emotion at play. Defense mechanisms come from fear. There's a fear somewhere. Find it, address it, and then move forward. Okay? All right. Again, it's almost always fear. And then your biggest thing is, as we're going to talk about, active listening. Okay? Active listening is important because it helps the other person recognize you are actually listening and not just like, bouncing, sounding board or whatever. Let's see here. Do point out defense mechanisms when you're looking at characters in movies and books and public personalities, including politicians. It's one thing if you're talking to your friends. It's another thing when it is a figure out there and they're using these to manipulate or whatever it is. Make sure you are mindful of that. It helps so that you are not manipulated in the future. It's also a great way to teach your kids how to avoid groupthink. And then don't just label the behavior, analyze it. Okay. Let's get into, I really want to get into active listening. Empathy is really important when it comes to active listening, and it's the ability to identify with and understand the feelings and perspective of others. We need more empathy in this world. Oftentimes, I do see it where people don't have enough empathy. Empathy and compassion are very different. Empathy is not just going, I understand. It's literally identifying with and actually understanding the feelings rather than just saying it. All right. Last but not least, we have active listening. All right. Active listening is a communication technique that is used in counseling, training, and conflict resolution. And if you are in retail, you already know what active listening is. Okay. The idea here is to listen fully, concentrate, understand, respond, then remember what is being said. And I'm going to give you some steps on that. Your best bet is to paraphrase and summarize the thoughts and feelings of the person speaking with the goal of empathetic understanding. Okay. 9 steps of active thinking. Active listening. Sorry, it's too long. It's a long video. Sorry. Put aside the need to win the argument or be right. Focus on the need of the other person to be heard. Sometimes this in of itself will help break down, once you're just listening, right? Focus on what their need is and let them know they're being heard. Use attentive body language. Keep your body open, right? Don't just do this. You just want to be open to them and mindful, right? Just nodding, right? So that you're listening, show them that you're in it. You want to face the person, at least come close to them so you're listening instead of just standing back here and rolling your eyes, right? Obviously show body language. Where are you at? Make sure you're not busying yourself with another task. Don't ignore them, okay? And don't just stare at someone. Acknowledge them, okay? Let the other person completely express their opinion or their view without interrupting or commenting. And sometimes that's hard because we feel defensive and we want to say the thing. Don't do that. Just listen. Recognize they need to say it. Let them say it. And then let them take as much time as they need. Sometimes when talking it out, someone might come to the realization of maybe they might be out of line. Maybe it's not really what they want. Let them talk. It's okay. Without interrupting, let them go. All right. Once they have said their thing, paraphrase, right? Go back and paraphrase as clearly as you can what the person said. Try not to put in your own words. Go and say almost verbatim what they said so that you can, right? Instead of manipulating and turning it around on them, you really truly want to hear what they say and repeat it back. Okay. Make sure that your tone's obviously respectful. You're not mocking. You're not dismissive. You're trying to be as respectful as possible. Because isn't that what you would want to? Instead of somebody mocking you for how you feel, you respect it. Okay. When you paraphrase, it's more likely going to be shorter and maybe quite a bit shorter, right? When you kind of just say the thing, because maybe they had to say a lot to really mean, to say something really short. Try opening with, I hear what you're saying is, and then you repeat it. And then allow the person to correct you. Let them correct you if they need to, because they might go, no, that's not what I meant. What I meant was, and give them the opportunity to clarify. That's a very key thing. Let them clarify, okay? Hopefully they will acknowledge your effort. I'm sorry, go back again. Paraphrase again so that way you can recognize, okay, this is what they said, this is what I'm seeing, and then you want to make sure that you acknowledge your effort by saying, yes, you heard me right. Hopefully they recognize that. All right. And then 9, it's not necessary to end with agreeing with the person. You don't have to agree with them. And it's not a good idea to then end your paraphrase by following with a disagreement. Don't just start another fight, argument, whatever, disagreement. Your goal is to make sure that the other person feels entirely heard. Okay. Normally in class, we would do something where you could engage in active listening with another person, but maybe you can sit down with somebody you care about and say, hey, let's hash out that argument that we had. Utilize this active listening material and see if it works. So, all right. It's a lot. I know. I'm sorry. Love y'all. Good luck. And I hope that this lecture helps you with those questions. Okay.